A Rhodes Scholar, he taught at the University of Oxford and is the author of two acclaimed books, Haminast, a biography of Article 370, and Independence and Accountability of the Indian Higher Judiciary. With the Colonial Constitution, he has done what every publisher always hopes for. He has written a book that makes a strong, provocative argument that's getting a lot of people very hot and bothered. In a landscape littered with hagiographic accounts of the Constitution, Dr. Sengupta says it like it is. How did we end up with the Constitution that we did? This is that story. What was Ambedkar's precise role in the drafting? What did the other constitutional options at this time look like? The Savarkar Hindu Mahasabha Constitution, for instance. And why, after long years of struggle against preventive detention and sedition in the freedom movement, did such obnoxious things not get outlawed by the Constituent Assembly? Why wasn't more sovereign power given to levels of government closer to the people, as Gandhi had wanted? Why was the colonial government replaced by an elected government that still very much towered over the people like an imperial lord? Whether or not you agree with Dr. Sengupta's conclusions or his calling the Constitution colonial, his book, his questions, his arguments simply cannot be ignored. Thank you, Dr. Sengupta. We are proud to have published your book. In conversation with Dr. Sengupta today are Fali Nariman and Shekhar Gupta. Mr. Nariman truly needs no introduction. He is a living legend of the law, a senior advocate since 1971, the recipient of the Padma Vibhushan, the Gruber Prize for Justice. He has served as the president of the Bar Association of India for close to 2 decades and also as a Rajya Sabha MP. Thank you, sir, for being here today. Introducing the legendary Shekhar Gupta gives me a special thrill as he gave me my first job. He was my boss's boss's boss. Mr. Gupta is the chairman and editor-in-chief of ThePrint, a recipient of the Padma Bhushan. Mr. Gupta's national interest is the column most of us can't end our week without. Thank you, sir, for being with us today. I'd now like to call Dr. Sengupta and Mr. Gupta to the stage. We will now have an unveiling of the book. Oh, there's someone there. Somebody at Mr. Nariman's end has a copy, so if you could please hand Mr. Nariman the copy. My job is now done. Everybody, please put your phones on silent. And now I hand over the proceedings to Mr. Gupta.
Thank you. Arghya, congratulations on the book. Congratulations also on getting a full hall on a Friday evening at 6 o'clock. You have to have real cash value to ensure that. But we know it's Arghya, and congratulations also for giving title to a book which is a sure seller. A lot of people will buy the book even if they don't actually read it, which is always a good idea, because if you just rely on people who will buy the book and read it, you will sell too few books. In my business, digital publishing, it's also called clickbait. Because anybody says, colonial constitution, mere constitution ko colonial bolta hai, right? Our prime minister prays to it as if it's a scripture, as if it's a holy book. He enters parliament. As he enters parliament, he bows down to this book. And this fellow, but you know, Bengali fellows tend to be subversive. Whether they are in Kolkata or Delhi doesn't matter. So he calls such a constitution colonial. That said, this is a debate whose time has come. It's a debate where I'm not so qualified to talk. There are people more qualified to talk, Arghya and Fali Nariman himself, and many of you in the audience. But I look at it from the other end, which is the journalistic end, because it's a debate that's now on. there are multiple groups that are functioning. There are multiple groups which are functioning sort of in the general periphery of the larger argument. For example, if you have a group led by a former president looking at the idea of one nation, one election. Now, whatever my editorial view or anybody's editorial, political, philosophical, moral view on that, in a way, it's a fresh look at the Constitution, at the constitutional scheme of things. In Mr. Advani's times, in the Vajpayee-Advani era, also was a group set up to look at the Constitution. Go further back, Mrs. Gandhi, Indira Gandhi, in her heyday, this Constitution and the judiciary, which drew its power from this Constitution, were actually seen as a great hindrance to what she saw as progress. And Fali Nariman was at the receiving end of that to an extent, because her idea was then a committed judiciary, a judiciary that is socially in tune with the times, and that's why that big amendment in 1976 in an illegitimate parliament was brought in, most of which was reversed as the Janta came in, but all of it was not reversed. And that's where the idea of fundamental duties came in, which wasn't the original idea of the Constitution. So Constitution has gone through many changes. But can the ideas that are floating now, and living in this city, having lived in the city for this long and watched this debate go through many phases, from Mrs. Gandhi to Mr. Advani to now, I can tell you two things. One, as was it Victor Hugo who said, nobody can stop an idea whose time has come. So a big change in the Constitution, I suspect, is getting into an area where it's in the area of nobody can stop an idea whose time has come. Now, depending on where you stand on that argument, you could even say, oh, which is something that I say in my most cynical moments, which are most of my moments, that nobody can stop a bad idea whose time has come. And why do I say so? And he's not saying junk this Constitution. This title is clickbait. He's not saying junk this Constitution. In fact, his view is a bit more libertarian than what this Constitution actually entails. His view is more devolution, on which I might have a different view. But the fact is, I will just make two quick points. One, that everybody had expected in 1947 that India is an artificial construct, that it will break up. Look at the history of the world. If you look at the history of the world through post-colonization and post-World War, World War II, every new state that came into being, every new diverse state that came into being, every single new diverse state that came into being has broken up. We see Pakistan broke up, Middle East broke up in so many, and right now there is ISIS there between these straight line countries, right? Nobody knows who's whose. All of East Europe broke up, Soviet Union broke up, Yugoslavia broke up in so many that even I lose count sometimes. It's only when I find that North Macedonia beats France, so France can't qualify for Football World Cup. North Macedonia kahan se aaya, right? So all of these countries are broken up. Even if you look close by, Indonesia, you might say, oh, Indonesia hasn't broken up, but it has. It shed East Timor. It may be a small part of it, but it shed East Timor. India has not only not broken up, with every decade, India has become stronger. India was stronger in the 60s than 50s, 70s than 60s, so on and so forth. And this when in 1960-61, Selig Harrison wrote that book, India, the Dangerous Decades, where he pretty much predicted that India will break up. So this, if India has stayed together and has become stronger over these decades, while every other new republic broke up, a lot of the credit goes to this Constitution. That is one. Second is his larger argument, weak center or strong center. There comes one more. Another mover of the debate. So if we look at the two states with which India has had trouble or tension over the past many decades, Punjab and Jammu and Kashmir. Now, there is a conundrum. The conundrum is whenever you have a weak government in Delhi, you will see problems in Kashmir. You will see trouble rise in Kashmir. I can draw a straight line for you. Through India's history, it's a straight line. Weak government in Delhi, there'll be trouble in Kashmir. On the other hand, whenever you have a strong government in Delhi, there is trouble in Punjab. Again, I can draw a straight line for you. We can sit over, drink or a cup of coffee. I can draw the chart through history. So this is a constitution which lets your state, your central government, be sometimes weak, sometimes strong, right? And then there is enough flexibility, and then there are all the amendments. So I will leave it at that. And now, Arghya, the floor is yours, and then Mr. Nariman.
Thanks very much, Shekhar. And thank you to everybody for coming out today on a Friday evening, particularly to Mr. Nariman. Mr. Nariman has been an inspiration for me as a young lawyer growing up, who has really made this constitution, whether colonial or not, come alive and become a tool for the people who need it the most. And so thank you very much, sir. And Shekhar has been the reason as to why I have moved away from law into what can be called clickbait, can be called politics, can be called anything except for law. And the reason for that is I feel that law needs to move out of the ivory tower. There's a certain way that law is taught in India, and I think that needs to change. But in that way in which law is taught, there is a standard script on the Constitution. And that standard script of the Constitution is that it goes something like this, that the Constitution of India is a wonderful document. It gives every Indian freedoms. It gives everyone the right to vote. It sets up the institutions of state, the parliament, the executive, the Supreme Court. And it's the reason as to why democracy has sustained. And there's a reason as to why that's the standard script. It's because it's true. And all of what Shekhar said is true. And over a number of years, we have heard this time and again. So my book is a provocation. It's a provocation because I feel that while all of what is said is true, there is much more to the Constitution. And the Constitution as a document, in my humble submission, should not be treated as a holy book that is to be worshipped. It needs to be engaged with, and its contents need to be critiqued. And that is the spirit in which I have approached this book. So why do I call it colonial? I'll give you a very brief teaser before Mr. Nariman comes in. I call it colonial because of 4 key reasons. The first is, and this is something that we know from our civics textbooks, whoever had the misfortune of having these NCRT civics textbooks, I certainly did, that this is the longest constitution in the world. I never knew whether that was a thing to feel proud of or not feel proud of, because I don't know what that means. But it is true that it is the longest constitution of any country in the world. I realized during this research that the constitution of the state of Alabama in the United States is 3 times as long. But it is the longest constitution for any country. And there is a reason why that's the case. The reason why that's the case, and some of these may be a little bit unsettling, is because of the fact that the Constitution provides every aspect in great detail. So let me give you an example. Article 273 is a provision that very few know about. Article 273 exists in the Constitution today, is a provision that provides grants in aid from the center to the states of Bihar, Odisha, and West Bengal. Why does it do that? It does that in lieu of export duty on jute products that has been exported from India. So because these states are jute producers, they don't get money directly, so the center gives grants in aid. Now, jute may be very important for the state of Bihar, West Bengal, and Odisha, but is it important enough to be in the Constitution of India? And I think that is a question that is up for debate. And there is a philosophy that underlies this. This is not an example that is random or arbitrary. The philosophy is that Indians are not yet ready for democracy. So we have to spell out everything in great detail. Now, if we really inquire into the basis of this view, this is a colonial holdover, the idea that the natives cannot be trusted. So when we are democratic, we say that let's go slowly because the people aren't ready for democracy. So let's lay everything down in excruciating detail in the Constitution. Now, it's my view, as Shekhar said, that this is a Republican view, that we, and not American Republican, but theoretical Republican, that at the end of the day, the power belongs to the people. And we are only as good as the people we elect. So whether we like it or not. So I think that's the first reason that it is extraordinarily prescriptive document. The second is that it's, even if the people were to understand what this is about, it's written in very dense legal jargon. It's very difficult. Unless you were preparing for UPSC exams, no one would read the Constitution cover to cover. It's impossible to read the document like that. But perhaps a truly post-colonial constitution would be a simple document written in simple English and vernacular languages, which is possible for every Indian to read. It is not just a document which is, ye vakilo wali document hai. It's not something like that. The third, and I'll stop with these two quick final reasons. The third is what I think is key, is that we know that the Constitution sets up a number of fundamental rights of individuals, which is really its cornerstone. And for that, as a citizen, I'm truly grateful. But each of those rights comes with a slew of restrictions. And one of the key restrictions is on the right to life and personal liberty. And the right to life and personal liberty is restricted in a number of ways. And one of those ways is preventive detention. The idea that the police can detain people without formal legal process. Now, you might have thought, we've all heard of the Rowlatt Act. Gandhiji had called it a black act. No self-respecting nation would accept it. You might have thought that the framers of the Constitution, having been detained by the British Raj on a number of occasions, might have made a provision as simple as preventive detention in all forms is prohibited. Maybe that is a provision that we could have had in the Constitution. Instead, the framers hedged their bets. By a vote of 2:1, and all of this is in the book, the drafting committee decided that they would continue preventive detention in the Constitution, albeit with a range of safeguards. Now, the fact is that they were choosing to be pragmatic, and they were choosing to be pragmatic because there was partition. In fact, on the day that they were discussing this in Paharganj, there was a newspaper article that Paharganj was resembling a battlefield. So you can see why they were doing it. But at the end of the day, Paharganj is peaceful, but the Constitution still sanctions this kind of a police state. And let's look at some statistics that my colleagues at the Vidhi Centre have come up with, that the number of people who were arrested in India, that is following proper legal process, in 2021 was 58 lakh people. So 58 lakh people were arrested for some crime that they purportedly committed. In comparison, 86.6 lakh people were detained by the police. That is without any legal process. That is essentially the policeman comes, picks somebody up and puts them behind bars. Now, this unfortunately is a reality that is sanctioned by the Constitution. It certainly wasn't envisaged by the Constitution. There is no way that it was envisaged by it. In fact, the framers of the Constitution felt that now that the government is going to be run by Indians, it is going to be run for Indians. Now, this is a view that we can discuss for a long time, and this is not to castigate future generations of Indians, because we have firmly dispelled that myth that we will run government for Indians, irrespective of political parties. Because at the end of the day, Gandhi had said at that point itself that human beings are good and bad. Sometimes they are mean, sometimes they are generous, they are selfish, they are selfless. It's a combination. I think Javed Akhtar was here recently, and Javed Akhtar had written that line in Fir Bhi Dil Hai Hindustani about Indians that apni chhatri tumko de de kabhi jo barse pani, but kabhi naye packet mein beche tumko cheez purani. So we do all kinds of things. So the fact is that we are a complex people, so to hope that Indians will be good and will act well was perhaps a fond hope. And finally, the Constitution perpetuated colonial institutions. Since I was talking about the police, take the Imperial Police Service. The Imperial Police Service was perhaps responsible for most of the brutality of the British Raj. But when it comes to the Constitution, Article 312 of the Constitution enshrines the Indian Police Service. It makes the police service an all India service. And at the same time, there are no restrictions. in the sense that there are no changes in the incentive structures, no retraining of these policemen. So there is a view that the policemen, now imbued with newfound freedom, will change overnight. Now we know that that's not going to happen. Now this is not a sign of dismay, but instead it's a wake-up call. As I've said in the book, this is not a call to draft a new constitution overnight. Constitutions don't get drafted overnight. But this is certainly a call to think about new constitutional ideas for India. Because, again, going back to Gandhi, because Gandhi had a lot of interesting things to say about the constitution, and I'll end with this. When he went to the second roundtable conference in London, which was to draft a future constitution for India, he was criticized for not carrying volumes of comparative constitutional law. He said to draft a constitution, you don't need volumes of comparative constitutional law. You need to understand India, because a constitution is instinctive to India. At that point of time, we needed to have an honest conversation about the constitution. We again need to have an honest conversation about the constitution today. And I'm sure with all of you present here, with Mr. Nariman and Mr. Gupta, we will certainly have one today. Thanks very much.
Yeah, can you hear me now, Fali?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Absolutely loud and clear as usual, as the judges always could hear you.
Okay. So my good and distinguished friend Shekhar Gupta, he always wears many hats, and as usual, he's been most eloquent this evening. Mr. Mehrotra, who's editor-in-chief of Jagannath Books, excellent presentation. But above all, I address the friends and admirers of Arghya Sengupta. I have known the author of this book, just released, for some years now. And I can tell you all that he is not just a good lawyer, as you heard him today, he is a damn good lawyer, if you will pardon the expletive. When someone you have known is a person in the law, you get to appreciate his true worth only when he appears against you in a case. And so it was with Sengupta and me. He and I were on opposite sides of a case way back in the year 2015, a case that has since matured into a somewhat cause célèbre. He was then actively assisting the Attorney General of India, who was supporting a vital constitutional amendment passed along with an enacting law which altered the entire system of appointment of judges in the higher judiciary. I was for the petitioners challenging this amendment and the law. And it was then that I was able to appreciate his true worth. I found him dedicated to the cause he was representing. And it is this quality at all times that singles out a good and successful lawyer. It was for this reason that I agreed to release this book, even from my home in Delhi, something that I know is a great deal of inconvenience, causes great deal of inconvenience to listeners, for whom I must apologize to those who are present in the hall. Now, the theme of the book, you have been told by Shekhar as well as by the author, is apparent from its title. On the very first page, in a one-line sentence, Sengupta throws down the gauntlet, almost defying anyone who wants to pick it up and contradict him. Because on the very first page he writes, the Constitution of India is a colonial document. He defies all and sundry to contradict him if they wish, but at their peril, because he will strongly defend it as he has when he spoke to you just now. Page after page of this extremely readable volume is in support of his thesis. And the theme, in short, is that since the framers of India's constitution wanted a consensus, they believe that an Indianized version of the British Parliament's Government of India Act 1935 was the best way to achieve it. And this is how the 1950 constitution of ours was conceived and enacted. But then I must tell you Dr. Ambedkar had frankly admitted when he introduced the draft constitution to India's Constituent Assembly way back in November 1948. He was then addressing an almost male audience, since there were only 17 female members in a fluctuating body of nearly 300 members known as the Constituent Assembly. And Dr. Ambedkar had said, and I quote, "As to the accusation that the draft constitution has produced a good part of the provisions of the Government of India Act 1935, I make no apologies. There is nothing to be ashamed of in borrowing. It involves no plagiarism. Nobody holds any patent rights in the fundamental ideas of a constitution." And he went on to say, "What I am sorry about is that the provisions taken from the Government of India Act 1935 relate mostly to the details of administration. And I agree, administrative details should have no place in a constitution." But at the same time, he did offer two reasons to justify their conclusion. First, because, as he said, the form of administration has a close connection with the form of the constitution. But the second reason he gave was much more important. And this is what he said: "It is perfectly possible to pervert the constitution without changing its form, by merely changing the form of the administration and to make it inconsistent with and opposed to the spirit of the constitution," unquote. The words "pervert the constitution" and "spirit of the constitution" are Dr. Ambedkar's words, not mine. The father of India's constitution was against anything that would, as he put it, pervert the constitution, and was contrary to anything being introduced that would be in contravention of its spirit. Now, this was said as far back as November 1948, but the sentiment therein expressed was transmitted later, much later, into legal jargon by judges in India's Supreme Court when they felt compelled to invalidate a few, very few, clauses of one or more of the total of 105 constitutional amendments that we have had since 1950, because they violated what judges described in their legal language as the basic structure of the Constitution. It is quite remarkable that a perversion of the Constitution, in Ambedkar's words, and something against the spirit of the Constitution, again, Ambedkar's words, had been envisaged by the framers way back in November 1948, when only the draft Constitution was presented to members of India's Constituent Assembly. They later took 2 years, 11 months, and 19 days to debate, discuss, and alter this draft, ultimately arriving at a consensual document only in November 1949. Let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, India's constitution, reputedly the longest in the world, that's what you have been just told, is needlessly long. And it does have, as Sengupta says, a colonial past. And this is because the very idea of a parliamentary form of government, like that of Great Britain's, was something that had inspired 19th century nationalists like Bal Gangadhar Tilak and 20th century Indian nationalists like Tej Bahadur Sapru to demand from Great Britain a constitution along with a Bill of Rights, just as the English had in Britain, although in England the constitution was and has always remained unwritten. You must also know that although in the 19th and earlier 20th century the demand of India's nationalist leaders was for a British institutions of governance, there was one person who was against it, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Way back in the year 1909, Mr. Gandhi was in England for his bar examination, after which he went to South Africa. And Barrister Gandhi agreed wholeheartedly with what G.K. Chesterton, the most prominent English writer of the 20th century, had written in an issue of the Illustrated London News an issue of September 18th, 1909. In that issue, Chesterton had written, and I quote, "The idea of Indian nationalists was not very Indian and not very national." And he went on to explain there is a world of difference between a conquered people demanding its own institutions and the same people demanding the institutions of a conqueror. And in the collected works of Mahatma Gandhi, now in 98 volumes, believe it or not, 98 volumes, you will find that Barrister Gandhi agreed with this view. In volume 9 at page 425 of these collected works, there is the following sentence, and I quote, "Indians must reflect over these views of Mr. Chesterton and consider what they should rightly demand," unquote. But more than 7 decades, ladies and gentlemen, have passed since then, and India's document of governance has worked in a fashion, though fractiously at times. And you will find, when you read the book, this book, which you must, that the author does not recommend scrapping the 1950 Constitution. Instead, in an intellectually stimulating narrative, he advises some load shedding, some pruning. And when you read the book, you will see what he means. I would like to end these so-called keynote remarks with a story, particularly because it's a true story, and it is also relevant this evening. The Westminster-type constitution that we have adopted in January 1950, to which Sengupta takes some exception, had been adopted by almost all the 56 erstwhile British colonies around the world. This was after the end of the Second World War. And many of these British colonies had also adopted, almost verbatim, the provisions of Macaulay's Indian Penal Code of 1860, and along with it, the definition of the offense of sedition, which had been adopted by the Indian Penal Code in the year 1870. The British colonies became independent nation states after the end of the Second World War and are now known as the Commonwealth nations of the world. And there is a Commonwealth Institute in Britain that regularly holds Commonwealth law conferences. My story concerns one such conference, the 12th Commonwealth Law Conference held in the year 1999 in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, which my wife and I had attended. There were more than 500 delegates at this conference. They included judges and chief justices from various parts of the Commonwealth. Also present at the inaugural was a most distinguished guest of the evening, the then Prime Minister of Malaysia, Mr. Mahathir Mohamad, that grand old man who is even today pushing almost 100 years in age. At the inaugural, a retired judge of the Court of Appeal in Malaysia, a judge of Indian origin, introduced and welcomed his Prime Minister. And he began his address in a very loud voice. And this is what he said. "In Malaysia, ladies and gentlemen, there is complete freedom of speech." A sentiment that was greeted by prolonged applause. And Prime Minister Mahathir looked pleased, very pleased. The judge paused, and after a long pause, he resumed saying, this time in much softer tones, "But there is no freedom after speech." The audience only gasped. They were aghast. Prime Minister Mahathir looked visibly displeased, but out of respect for the distinguished old man, there was no audible reaction from the audience. And believe me, there was no applause. Like in India, Malaysia had and still retains that dreaded penal law known as the law of sedition, an avowedly colonial law that enjoined citizens not only to observe the laws while maintaining public order, but in addition, enjoins all citizens to have positive affection for the government of the day. This is something that is common to many of the 56 Commonwealth countries around the world, including India. And my concluding message to you this evening is, the sooner we get rid of this anomaly, the better for the survival of democracy in this country. So let's not think of a new constitution for India, but instead, and as a start, hope to usher in a new and better understanding of India's constitution by first getting rid of Section 123 capital A of India's Penal Code, as well as its equivalent in the now current version of the draft Bharati Dand Sanhita. Thanks a lot for your patience.
So, thank you, Fali. The best thing I can do for TRPs, if that was a test, is to just let you keep talking. So I don't come in the way. But I've been asked to do a job by Arghya, so I shall do it. Although the best thing is to just let Fali speak for another half an hour. That said, you've read the book. It's a small book, but it's a sharp book. Even if, first of all, how colonial is this constitution? And second, even if it's colonial in large parts, what is the problem? And if there is a problem, what is the solution? So it's a long question. So I'm going with the spirit of my, what I said earlier, to let you talk for as long as possible, which you know is not usually the case with me.
Now that you mention all this about the colonial part of the Constitution, yes, it is in a sense it is, and in a sense it is not. But shouldn't we try to make it perhaps more democratic than what it is? And I like the suggestion that's already made in the book, namely, why don't we get rid of this preventive detention? In any case, and in any case, we must also try to remodel our criminal procedure code so that people do not get into this position of sustained imprisonment even before the trial commences. And we have hundreds of thousands of people like this rotting in jails before even their trial commences. But let me now end by asking the audience to pose some questions, particularly to my dear friend Shekhar, so that he can answer them.
That ball is tossed right back gratefully. So we are not letting you go there. Fali, do you see missed opportunities that our governments have had, great leaders have had, in improving this constitution? There have been many amendments, but many of those amendments were responding to political needs of the day.
Well, I'm not very sure. You see, the majority of amendments, some of them at least, were during that ill-fated internal emergency. And although the Janata government came back and tried to get rid of them, one very, very important amendment which was there and which I don't know whether any of you have seen it, because it's no longer in the Constitution, is 329 capital A, which deals with the chapter on elections. And it's a very, very pertinent amendment, because when Mrs. Gandhi lost her election in the Allahabad High Court and was unseated in Parliament, the initial reaction of the government was to introduce a monstrous amendment, which was 329A4 of the Constitution, which said that it doesn't matter what the Allahabad High Court has said. It makes no difference. She will never be said to be have vacated her office. Therefore, what was attempted was that something should be done by a constitutional amendment, which could not be done at all. And ultimately, it was a very great thing that our Supreme Court stood up to it and said, no, that's not permissible. Election is the lifeblood of a nation. We must have elections, and everybody is subject to the same set of laws, including the current Prime Minister, Mrs. Gandhi. So, and that I think is one of the great safeguards that we have had, because 329A was then declared unconstitutional, and it remains unconstitutional. And we have had this Supreme Court stretching out and making it very clear that they will not countenance this sort of subversion of a democracy.
So, Shekhar, if I could just come in on this
Sure.
one point that you made, because this is a question that constantly gets asked. That can you hear me? Yeah, this is a question that constantly gets asked, which is that even if it is colonial, what's the problem? And sitting in this room, of course, there is really not that much problem as far as we are concerned, because we are having this conversation. We can talk of freedom of speech and freedom after speech, and nothing is going to happen to us in all likelihood. But
You guaranteeing that?
Mr. Nariman is here. Mr. Nariman is here.
Hold him to his word.
Mr. Nariman is here, and if anything happens, you know whom to look at. And it's not me. But I think the question that as to why this becomes important about what's the problem with it being colonial is, number one, the problems that Mr. Nariman talked about in relation to under trials in prison, the problems that we talked about in relation to preventive detention. Yes, at one level we can deal with it saying that, the policeman is corrupt. This is how we usually deal with it, by saying that, oh, this person is not doing their job. And all of that may be true. But there is a constitutional sanction that allows police impunity in this country, number one. And I think that is one type of problems. Then second, in my book I deal with emergency, Article 356. Now, this is such an incredible provision, in my view, because, and not just in my view, because when Lord Mountbatten was leaving the country, the British actually passed a provisional order to keep the Government of India Act continuing to apply in India till we came up with the Indian Independence Act. It was one of these transitional kind of measures which was going to be in place only for a very few days. Now, in that, the British themselves deleted this provision, the earlier version of Article 356, because they felt that now that India is a federal democratic state, there is going to be no basis for provision of this nature. And this was pointed out by H.V. Kamath, the member of the Constituent Assembly. And at that point of time, the majority of the Constituent Assembly said, no, we need to keep this provision for a variety of reasons, which we can get into. And in fact, he remarks that this is the saddest day for Indian democracy. And I think the effects of that are being felt by all those governments, whether it be the government of that Ramesh Bhandari sacked in Uttar Pradesh, whether it be the government in Arunachal Pradesh that was sacked recently, by recently 10 years back, and in pre-Bombay, of course, the multitudes of governments that were sacked. And I think all of that, we tend to think of it in the day-to-day of politics, but all of it is made possible because of the fact that there was a certain worldview. And I think that's really the problem of the Constitution.
Well, that's a great point, and I'll take that point to Fali. Fali, Arghya says preventive detention, and then he says police are corrupt. Now, if I could give you a little bit of a counterpoint of mine and leave it to you for your judgment, that it's a little bit lazy of us to say preventive detention laws are misused because the police are corrupt. The police are as corrupt or uncorrupt as the politicians, because I don't think any policeman in India can use preventive detention laws against anybody unless their chief minister orders them to do so. So any law or any constitution, isn't it only as good as the politicians who are using it?
Yes, yes, you are right. You see, I'll tell you something. When I was additional Solicitor General, and then after the emergency, etc., I resigned the day after. And we were all invited before that to a place called Rajamundry in Andhra Pradesh. Krishnaya, myself, and Justice Rangarajan of the Delhi High Court. And uh, I said that I'm no longer a law officer, so you had invited me as a law officer, I don't want to. So, but the organizers are very good. They said, no, no, we invited you because you are an advocate, etc. So we, all of us, hopped off to Rajamundry, and there, when we went there, the organizer met us and with a very long face, and he said, you know, something terrible has happened yesterday. We said, what? He said, my son has been arrested under MISA. MISA is that Maintenance of Internal Security Act. And he said, why? What did you do? All he said was, when the college was functioning, that when someone suggested that we must all go out and march in favor of the 20-point program of Mrs. Gandhi, he, like a nut that he was, stood up and said, no, sir, no, we shouldn't do that. We'll do that on a Saturday. It's better that we don't do that on a working day. And do you know that a district magistrate in Rajamundry on that basis issued a MISA order against him, and he was detained. And not only was he detained, when we spoke to the law minister in Andhra Pradesh at that time and asked him to do something about it, and of course he was released, nobody knew where he was. And that is the other problem about the secrecy that surrounds all this. And after 2 or 3 days, he was ultimately found and returned to his parents. Now, this is a problem that arises with an autocratic regime. An autocratic regime doesn't mean that the top autocrat always orders everything. Mrs. Gandhi would have been aghast if she was told that this young boy was in college merely because he said we shouldn't go on for this 20-point program on a Saturday, but should be on a Friday, but should go on a Saturday. Now, but it is these officials who it gets into their system, and then the trouble is that they then administer the system with hobnailed boots. Hobnailed boots. This is the grave problem of our time.
Fali, which parts of the Constitution do you think are particularly outdated now? Or is there no part that is outdated?
No, I don't know about outdated. You see, there is a theory about constitutions that they only last for 20 odd years. Of course, the American Constitution has lasted for more than 200 years, and ours probably will last, and I hope it will last, because it is the only document, in my view, that keeps the country together. Whether you have a new constitution or you don't have one, this is a document that keeps the country together for many reasons, including the language problem.
And if you find the establishment raising questions, not raising questions, starting new debates about the Constitution, what are the areas which do you think make this establishment impatient about this Constitution?
You mean the present government?
The present government,
Or
yes.
the present government. Well, I think, you see, the trouble with us, unfortunately, is that somehow majoritarian governments and supermajoritarian governments, despite all that has gone, they just don't work. They just don't work, because we move much slower, of course, with a coalition government. But then I am in favor of coalition governments, because there is some method by which we freedoms get emphasized, which unfortunately with a majoritarian government, and I don't blame any party, because it's the same thing that happened during the emergency with another political party. It makes no difference.
Well, Mrs. Gandhi had a strong majority. She was also a very strong leader. Yet, one judge, a single judge in a high court, could unseat her.
Yes.
You see something like that happening today? I'm not saying that anybody should be unseated, but I mean, I worry about how this could be tweeted. But
Yes,
we live in
you're
a
quite
dangerous
right.
we live in a dangerous world. But do you see?
Yes, because
Do you see?
that's why I gave you yes, that's why I gave you this example of 329A. You won't even see, you won't even find it in any book on the Constitution because it's already repealed and knocked out. But you must get hold of it and see what it says. It's a monstrous amendment which could only be thought of by an autocratic government.
Yes, but given how much there is in this constitution,
Beg your
for
pardon?
given how much there is in this constitution for a government which wants to be autocratic, right? There is a lot of devices available to a government that wants to be autocratic. Given that, why should any government which has a majority want to change it? It's a very convenient constitution as well, isn't it?
I don't think the Constitution is to be blamed for it. It is how you view
No, no.
whether you want
I
to
think,
be autocratic.
Fali, sorry to interrupt. I don't think I was clear. I'm saying that this constitution has enough to give any autocratic government the tools it needs should it choose to be autocratic. So why
But
should
it
any
also gives,
why should any government
yeah, but it also gives enough for any government that does not want to be autocratic, not to be autocratic.
Yes.
You
So
see, now take the instance of the governors being appointed. I mean, why are the governors so vocal nowadays than they were before in various states? The only reason is because they are minions of the center. That this is the problem, which is very unfortunate. Very unfortunate.
so is the governor a colonial institution?
Of course, definitely. I'm not shirking that. Yes, it is a colonial, but there is no escape. You have to have a head of one of the states. You can't have a state which is headless. So you have to have a governor. Then you have the lieutenant governor in place of the governor in a union territory. Makes no difference what you call him. But he's always the man, the mouthpiece of the center. And sometimes and very often acts as the mouthpiece of the center, which is unfortunate. Again.
Well, I think there, with great respect, I think the governor is a colonial relic that we have to start thinking about getting rid of. And I think over a period of time, most governments have really helped my cause because they have become essentially ciphers of the government in the center, irrespective of political party. And if they have only two jobs to do, that is essentially in case that there is a difficulty in who has won the election, to call one party, and or to dissolve the house, surely we can find better methods of doing each of these things. We can, there is a solution in this country for most problems, which is that if no one else can do it, then the Chief Justice of India can do it. Okay, so maybe this is one of them where we can actually adopt this kind of solution. Maybe not the Chief Justice, but someone they nominate. But on that question, in terms of what needs to change, talk about which is these rights and so on. But I think there are two parts, since everybody's here, that I do think need to be really introspected. The first is the 7th schedule of the Constitution. This is what actually Vivek Debroy was writing. He's here today in the article that sparked off a debate, that we need to think about a better division of powers between the center and the states. Because say, I'll give you a very simple example. The internet. Who is going to legislate on the internet? Who is responsible for internet shutdowns in Manipur? I mean, surely the internet shutdown in Manipur should ultimately be authorized by the local government. But the fact is that this is currently a gray area, because obviously the Constitution could not envisage who will legislate on the internet, whether it will be the center or the states. But instead we have entries on who will legislate on burial grounds and cemeteries and borstal schools and prison reformatories and so on and so forth, whatever was relevant in 1950. So one of these things that we need to think about, a better division of powers between the center and the states, is the 7th schedule. And I think this is one issue that requires deep thought. And the second is this idea which was brought in that infamous 42nd Amendment of fundamental duties. As I talk in my book, this the idea of duty is a very traditionally Indic idea, whether you see it as dharma, as Gandhi saw it, or as kartavya, as we are seeing it now. But the idea has deep Indic roots. But the point is that the idea of duties is duties towards each other. How can we be better citizens and how can we behave better with each other? What the fundamental duties chapter did is that it said, okay, you must stand up whenever there is the national anthem. There's that kind of stuff that's there in that, you must have respect for international law. There's kind of things which are very arcane. So the idea of duty became conflated with these fundamental duties in the 42nd Amendment, and I think that we need to rescue the idea of duty from that. And these are two ideas, and on the point of strong governments versus weak governments, I think the only government that wanted to do something meaningful and constructive about the constitution was the government of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. And Mr. Nariman knows this, and he, in that case that he was talking about, the judicial appointments case, in fact, he recommended that there be a commission to appoint judges, as was recommended by the National Commission to review the working of the Constitution. That was set up by Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government, and it had the former Chief Justice of India, Venkat Chalaiya, as the chairperson of that commission. And they produced some brilliant papers in terms of how the Constitution needs to change. And I think this is not as I say many times, this is not a party political debate, because we tend to see everything now in Delhi through Modi tinted glasses. Is this going to help or is it going to hurt? But this is not a debate which is party political. This is really a debate about what are the provisions of the Constitution that need to go and what are the provisions that are needed for 21st century India.
Well, I mean, that said, provisions of the Constitution.
And there was, in fact, Justice Venkat Chalaya's suggestion was actually incorporated by the then government in a constitution amendment bill in 2003. And unfortunately, that bill couldn't be passed only because elections were called and the bill lapsed. That is the unfortunate part of it.
Those elections are called prematurely because BJP won these 3 Hindi heartland states. They thought, Beti Ganga mein haath dholo. So they advanced elections by 6 months and we know what happened. On the governor's issue, I quite like something that Bhagwant Mann said the other day, Punjab Chief Minister, because he's, as you would expect, having problems with his governor. And he said, why do all these Raj Bhavans have these cannons at their entrance? Every Raj Bhavan has these old colonial cannons. So those colonial cannons are there at every Raj Bhavan. He said, ये जनता को डराने के लिए है. कोई डरता नहीं है उनसे. I'm surprised some have not been stolen yet because they are sort of lucrative pieces of collection value. But governors are a bit of an anachronism. And I know because I deal with them as a journalist, and I know the issue there. The governors who are in non-BJP states are constantly at war and much too busy and waiting for the phone call from Delhi, ab kya karu, right? But the truly miserable Indian is a governor in a ruling party state. It can be a BJP state today, it could be a Congress state earlier, uske paas kuch nahi hai karne ke liye. And I've had a succession of them in different states tell me, if nothing else, come and stay with me. I have all this and nothing to do. And I will give you the example of one whose name I shall not mention, who found out I was in his city and in a state of the party ruling at the center and sent for me. And then he was upset. He was not upset. He said that you said something adverse on one of my tweets. I said, yes, you shouldn't have tweeted this. So he said, you think I tweet too much? So I said, well, too much or not, but why are you exchanging notes on Twitter with Pakistani women journalists? I mean, you are a governor. Aapko shobha deta hai. So he said, I don't know, what do I do? I have nothing to do. So my finger itches, right? So I just suggested to him that don't do it, because in this environment, even if you are from the BJP, this might get into trouble someday. But But so there are governors and governors. And I think the last thing anybody wants to be right now, the last job anybody should want right now is to be governor in a ruling party state, because then there is no fun. That said,
unless at the very beginning there was a proposal, very strong proposal, that the governor should not be an appointment of the center, but he should be elected. And that perhaps resolves much of the controversy, which is quite possible. You have it all over the world. In America, in the States, the governors are very important and they are all elected.
yeah, those governments have real powers though. So I think we'll go to the audience now. So please raise your hand. Microphone will come to you, and mention your name so you get recorded for posterity. And sir. You can take this. Then you can fix that and give that to me.
Thank you very much. Very enlightening discussion. I want to provoke, say, the chair's question, what exactly is colonial about the Constitution, has not been answered to my mind. I haven't read the book, and I will, but certain features are colonial is not the same thing as colonial constitution. So to my mind, what you mentioned, sedition, of course, but amend it and throw it out. Is there a case for a new constitution or police, Indian police service? To my mind, what it mentions is a police service, not the Indian police service. It needn't be that way. Or the union lists. Amend them. There was no internet. For that matter, environmental protection doesn't figure in any of the lists. Union, state, or 11th schedule.
Sir, if you could also introduce yourself.
My name is Saurabh Kumar. I'm a student of everything and I say this, I'm sorry to mention my own, but I have a small paper the ISE published, which asked for, we have to look at the Constitution and structure from the point of view of functionality. You have to specify how. Colonialism, to my mind, is not reason enough, because that is within your hands.
That's a good.
So how is it, the experience of 75 years, a la Justice Venkatacharya Commission, in the light, we have third-tier governance now.
So I think he'll answer it now.
Yeah,
He has enough food for thought.
So I think two things. One is that, it reminds me of that famous saying about India that, what you say its opposite is also true. So there could equally be a book written called The Anti-Colonial Constitution, which could also be true. But what I'm pointing out in the book are the colonial facets of the Constitution. And the colonial facets of the Constitution are that the very idea of a long constitution written in dense legal jargon with everything provided for in great detail is an idea that is based on the fact that the people cannot be trusted. And I think that if we didn't have this kind of constitution, if we had a short document that could allow jurisprudence to develop, principles to develop, conventions to develop, that might have been truer to who we are as a people. The second thing is that all the changes that you suggest, yes, as I said earlier, if you read the book, and as Mr. Nariman also suggested, that you will find that I am asking for certain parts of the Constitution which I think don't work anymore to go. It's too numerous to go into, but there are three parts that I discuss in the book in detail. One is on emergency provisions, and we need to change that. The second, as I said, is on preventive detention and essentially the powers of the police. And the third is we need to rethink directive principles of state policy and its presence in the Constitution today. So these are three things, but there's many more in the book, and I urge you to read it.
Hi, I'm Rohit. I run two organizations, Young Leaders for Active Citizenship and TQH, which is a policy firm, Arghya, and we've known each other for a while. I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, but I do want to ask, what is the counterfactual? So if we had started with a shorter constitution where things were left to be developed by jurisprudence and everything else, do we really know whether it would have worked? In fact, there is a Samvidhan episode on federalism, wherein there is a quote from Ambedkar, where he says that India is a feudal society on which you are trying to layer a democratic structure. Perhaps it needed that kind of detailing. So how can we even know, right?
Yeah, we can never know. I mean, the short answer is that we can never know. I can't really say that it would have turned out beautifully. Maybe what I'm suggesting would have led to a complete revolution in the country in 5 years, there is really no way that I can say that that would have been better. But that's why I say in this book that it is an origin story. It is talking about the impulses that drove our constitution. And the idea behind the book is a very simple one, that there is a standard script which has currently become dogma that we don't think about. That the constitution as in is great for ABC reasons. It may be true, but what this book really urges is for everyone in this room and outside, and particularly young students of constitutional law, to think more deeply and for themselves about the constitution and which parts work and which parts don't. That's really the message of the book.
So, Fali, if I come back to you, dogma. Is constitution the dogma, or is it the concept of the basic structure that is a dogma? And if so, is it a good dogma or not such a good dogma?
I don't know. You see, you must realize that our constitution, someone has counted the number of words. It is about almost 150,000 words, whereas the world's oldest constitution is not even 8,000 words. So we do have an enormously long constitution, and it could have been shorter. But you must realize that at the time when it was conceived and drafted, etc., the British had left us in a huff and in a peak, actually, because they just withdrew. And at least the framers of the Constitution did a damn good job by putting their heads together and trying to arrive at some consensus, which I applaud. And I think that was a great thing that they did at that point of time, because we have to go back in history in order to gauge how successful was this constitution at the time that it was there, because the British had just left us in the lurch, as it were. They left us because of the mutiny of the Navy in Bombay, and that is what Attlee told the governor of Calcutta years later, that the reason why we pushed out of India was because we were not sure whether the forces would support the British in India anymore.
But the question on the basic structure, is that a dogma?
Yes.
And if so, is it a good dogma or a bad dogma?
Oh, excellent dogma. You just imagine, I can't think of a better dogma, because actually, and please remember that long before it was thought of by Justice Khanna, who delivered the narrow majority judgment in that 13-judge bench case in Keshavananda. Long before that, there was a German professor who had lived during the years of Hitler, when Hitler came to power on the Weimar Republic. And he was the man who really said that you can amend any aspect of the Constitution, but not its pillars. He called it the pillars of the Constitution. So it's the same sort of thing, the basic structure, the pillars. And everybody says, but what are the pillars and what is the basic? It can't be defined for the simple reason that you can't foresee what the amendment will be. Could anybody foresee that Mrs. Gandhi's non-vacating of office and the 329A, could anyone ever perceive of that? You can't perceive as to what they do. So therefore, you must leave that to the good sense of the world's highest judiciary. And that's what our Constitution does, because under Article 142, it is only the Supreme Court who can decide a case on the basis of justice of the case. It expressly says so, not high courts, not district courts. Therefore, that's the confidence which the framers of the Constitution had in the world's highest court.
So do you have a word of advice to a recent former Chief Justice who said the basic Constitution doctrine rests on a problematic basis?
No, I entirely disagree. I'm sorry. Much as I like Justice Thomas, and he was a great judge, but that doesn't mean that
Justice Gogoi said that in Parliament.
Yes, of course, I know that, but let's not mix up personalities, who said it and who didn't say it. You're quite right, he did say it, but we can disagree with that, because that's what democracy is all about.
No, but just I disagree, and I had written an article about Justice Gogoi's taking up the role as parliamentarian, and so I certainly have some strong reservations with him on those. there is one point that Mr. Nariman does mention, which is that it is an excellent dogma, provided we have a better understanding of what it is. And that itself can't change, because if it keeps changing, then it's not a dogma at all. So we have to be sure that what is that dogma.
Okay, so I think we have time for two questions. So you can have one to Arghya and one to Fali, and then
And
we
one
are
to
done.
Shekhar.
No, not to me.
To
No,
make
no,
it
no,
three.
no, no.
Yeah.
Aye.
Thanks. So, Arghya, my question to you is, you mentioned about internet, and Deepak Maheshwari, I've been involved in the internet policy for about 25 years now. So my question is, since it does not find any mention in any of the three lists, as per the Constitution, it should have been in the residuary clause. And that's why the central government should be doing it. But the fact is, why do we have every state government also having an IT department? To me, it seems as if IT at least has become a concurrent subject by default.
Yeah. Who has the microphone now? Any other questioners?
There's one at the back there, and there's one here, yeah.
Okay, let's take both questions and we can answer them together.
One quick question.
Vyoma, just give it at the back there.
This is a slightly different question. My name is Manu Seshadri. I'm a lawyer. My question is, should the concept of secularism be strengthened going forward, and should there be more of a separation or a concrete separation between religion and state in the Constitution? Is that an issue that needs to be addressed going forward? Thanks.
Hi, good evening, everyone. This is Amit. I'm a law student.
I think you should also say who the question is addressed to.
To all of you.
No, that is...
My question to everyone present in this hall is, what can pose a threat to basic structured doctrine? Since I'm a law student in the first year, we are reading about ninth schedule right now. So can this still be misused, that governments can still put some laws and they can put in ninth schedule, and there is no judicial scrutiny on that? So Mr. Fali Nariman, perhaps you would be the best person to answer this.
Yes, certainly, because actually there is a break which has been applied by Chief Justice Chandrachud Senior, not the present Chief Justice, but his father, who was Chief Justice much earlier, and that is that no law can get into the ninth schedule unless it passes the test of being valid under Article 14, 19, and 21. No such law, and that's what they have said. That is why all the laws that were put into the ninth schedule have remained valid, as it were, right up to April 1973. And after that, every single law that is put there makes no difference whether it has the protection of the ninth schedule or not. The courts can always decide whether it violates Article 14 and 21. That's the law.
Well, if I can just add something unsolicited, the only thing that can threaten the basic structure of the Constitution is the quality of your top judiciary. So keep watching the judges in your Supreme Court, because they are the ones who finally interpret it. Do they interpret it correctly and fairly, or do they interpret it to their convenience? That would depend entirely on who the judges are. So
You want to take that secularism one?
Yeah. No, I don't have to take it, but if you want me to take it, I would say that the Constitution is secular enough. There was no need even to put the word secular in the preamble, because the Constitution makes every citizen equal and says the state will not have a religion. So, I don't see a problem. I don't see the need. That's an editorial view. I don't know anything about law. There was no need to idiot-proof the Constitution, right? It is just unnecessary, because by putting it there, you've drawn attention to it and made it contentious as if it is something that wasn't intended to be in the original constitution. It was always intended to be in the original constitution. Indian idea of secular is not irreligious. Now, Bihar government has given us this blessing of a caste census. If you look at this caste census, the most interesting thing is it tells you how many Muslims, how many Hindus, how many Muslims, how many Sikhs, how many Jains, etc. It also tells you how many atheists. In a state of 14 crore people, how many people have listed themselves as atheists? Please guess. It's 2,346, right? That's all. So this is a country where everybody has a god and everybody has a choice of many gods or only one god, right? The state has nothing to do with it. I think Mrs. Gandhi, by inserting secularism there, made secularism a contentious and a debatable issue. So that is just editorial view.
So we'll just take one or two quick questions
Yeah,
and then we'll
quickly.
finish. That's what I've been told. Yeah, there's one there and one at the back and a couple here. Yeah.
And socialist also.
You
Socialist
brought in
also.
socialist and secular. There's one here. And
Hi, good evening. I'm Anand. My question is generally that what was the reason that finally in 1977, Mrs. Gandhi could do away with emergency when she was literally reigning at the time? That is one. And secondly, to Mr. Nariman, of course, that since 1973 and until 2015, it's only been 5 times, as Dr. Chintan Chandrachud has argued in his book, where the Supreme Court has actually used the basic structure doctrine to strike down what the Parliament has done. The most recent example was NJC, where they have done that. In 2022, they passed their verdict on EWS, but it was sustained. Thank you.
so, Shekhar, we'll just take a few together.
Yeah,
and
okay.
Then we can finish it off.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's one here, Amir and Jay at the back. Yeah.
I'm Jay Ojha, and my question is mainly to Dr. Sengupta and Mr. Nariman. The experience of my home state of Bihar has been that popular democracy does not always complement the highest standards of republican virtue. So should the law seek to solve that conflict, or should it operate on H.L. Mencken's principle that the people know what they want and they deserve to get it good and hard?
There's one, yeah.
Good evening. Good evening, Mr. Nariman. My name is Amir Singh Pastrich. My question is, we have dogma, dharma, and a wonderful basic structure constitution with so many bills of rights built in. Have we given ourselves too many rights because the courts are totally choked, and the future of dispute resolution and deciding those rights has become, I think, quite uncertain? The question of whether or not we'll be able to deal with that many rights, that many petitions, and that many seekers of justice has become difficult to manage.
Yeah, okay. I wish I was on the stage. I'm sorry I'm not, but I missed quite a few of the questions. But your last question that you asked, that you have posed, is a serious one. But you see, don't blame the Constitution for every damn thing that goes on in this country. Actually, please do realize the importance of the fact that it is the Constitution, whatever criticism there may be about it. But the most important thing is it has kept the country together. It has kept the nation together. So please always realize that. And whatever that may be said, or shortcomings that may be there, they have to be dealt with individually and compartmentally, and not on the basis that, oh, this constitution is oppressive and we should have another constitution, or we should think of something else. I'm sorry, I don't agree with that at all. And I don't think we'll ever have another constitution because the tolerance level today in all parts of the world is extremely low, including India. And the word fraternity, which is used in the Constitution, is hardly ever mentioned anywhere else, neither in the Constitution nor outside the Constitution. We are not as fraternal as we should be. And we should therefore improve ourselves and not the Constitution.
I think that's a very good note to conclude this on. And Amir, Mr. Pasrich, the answer to your question also is that one reason our courts are so clogged, there are many reasons, including the fact that we are not investing in our judiciary or judicial infrastructure. But another reason is that we have probably the most litigious government in the world, because our government challenges the citizen on everything. And even if the citizen gets justice in one level of court, the government chases the citizen right up to Supreme Court of India, because government has enormous legal resources and other taxpayer resources. And that's also one of the reasons. So that can be reformed more easily when government gets out of litigation or says that, okay, in these cases, we'll not go beyond the High Court. In these cases, we'll not go beyond the Sessions Court, etc. But in India, you watch these public sector PSU cases. Which PSU captain will let go of a case? He'll go to jail 5 years after his retirement. Or our civil servants. Look at the case of one Mr. H.C. Gupta. He did nothing wrong. He's been convicted in case after case. No conviction says he made any money. But he's just getting these jail sentences, and he's become so helpless that now he says, I will not even go defend myself. So the problem in our country also is that our government is so litigious. Our government, forget being forgiving, our government is not even willing to accept that they were wrong in some place, and that is one of the problems. So I think on that note, you want to say conclude?
May I just add one thing? Oh, sorry. May I just add one thing? Because I think people nowadays don't remember our first Attorney General, Mr. Motilal Sethuvat. He was an outstanding figure at the bar, and he held the whole court in thrall and the country also in thrall. So, and you see, he never conceded a point, I agree. But he would make it so difficult for the courts not to accept what he said, because he would stand up and say, when the judge argued with him and said, but Mr. Sethuvat, this can't be so, etc. And all that he would say is, that's all I have to say. That's all I have to say. I mean, you see, that we require people of that stature in our country. We require people of that stature who are able to tell, though they are counsel for government, that they can get up and tell the judge that, yes, I don't concede anything, but that's all I have to say. That's all he said. And he was a master at this technique. And I wish we had more people who behave like him.
And that also shows us why Fali Nariman is so valuable, so invaluable to all of us. Because he is one voice. When he speaks, everybody listens. And I speak as somebody who's hidden behind him in some difficult court cases, particularly some contempt cases with difficult judges with hurt egos in Supreme Court of India. Thank you.
No, I think that's all we all have to say. I'll hand over to Aditya.
Very good evening, everyone. Now, as it so happens, on the 26th of November, 1949, before putting the draft Colonial Constitution to the vote of the House, Dr. Rajendra Prasad made sure to briefly thank every single member of the Constituent Assembly, the drafting committee, the constitutional advisor, his secretariat, including the translation committee, the watch and ward officers, the police, the marshal, and all members of the staff. And it's only fair that we emulate this practice today. Now, of course, I'd first like to thank Mr. Nariman for being a source of inspiration to all of us. He's adroitly employed the Constitution, colonial though it may be, to assist our courts in preserving and advancing the rule of law. I'd like to thank Mr. Shekhar Gupta for steering this insightful conversation, but also, through his editorial views, as he puts it, keeping constitutional law and practice alive in the minds of everyday Indians, and decluttering it and making it accessible to all of us. I'd like to thank Mr. Srivastava, the director of the India International Center, and Tete ma'am, the chief of the program division, for organizing this event, Juggernaut for publishing this book, and Parth Mehrotra for expertly editing it. Big thank you to the entire Juggernaut team, especially Vyoma, for helping us put this event together. I'd like to thank all of you for being such a patient and engaging audience. goes without saying that all of us are very thankful to the author, Dr. Sengupta, for producing this definitive and in equal measure provocative origin story of the Indian Constitution. As a small gesture of our gratitude, we have a gift for Mr. Nariman.
Oh, sorry. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
And a small gift for Mr. Shekhar Gupta as well. As Mr. Setalvad said, that's all I have to say. A very good night to all of you. Thank you for coming.